NFL teams are cutting their rosters down to 53 players on Tuesday. Let's talk some potential waiver wire wish list targets.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liscow. He's your host, James Rapien. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, covering your team every day on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. Shout out to the everydayers out there and all of you who make us your first listen. Appreciate the regular listeners so very much. And if you're new to the show, you can subscribe to stay up to date on all things Bengals, like Ja'Marr Chase returning to practice yesterday. I think a lot of you saw that video on YouTube, the reaction, a little bit of analysis. We got some more information about Ja'Marr's participation in that practice that we will get to later in today's show. But with waivers just around the corner and the cut down to 53, that is where we start today in an episode brought to you by FanDuel. Through September 22nd, FanDuel is giving all customers who bet $5 3 weeks of free NFL Sunday ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. To get more details and to get started, check out FanDuel.com/lockedon. James, a common question at this time of year is, who should the Bengals be targeting on waivers? Are there players they could trade for? And not for bad reason. It wasn't too long ago that they pulled off the Billy Price, almost said Billy Heist, because it was a heist for BJ Hill trade that has solidified the Bengals defensive interior for the year since. But who should the Bengals be looking at? Where should the Bengals be looking for waiver or trade additions this year?
Well, I think the where is where we should start, because it goes hand in hand. And if you're looking for our thoughts on the 53-man roster, make sure you check out Monday's episode that led with Ja'Marr Chase. But to me, there's a couple of spots. One, well, they're probably only keeping 3 running backs. In fact, we'll break the news now. The plan is to only keep 3 running backs. And Travion Williams is RB3, but that is certainly an area they'll be looking at. They'll be looking at defensive line. I think with Myles Murphy's injury, what they decide to do with him, defensive end, certainly defensive tackle with McKinley Jackson nicked up, certainly been a topic for months and months now. Congrats to DJ Reader, by the way, of getting off the PUP list for the Lions. Hopefully he balls out in Detroit. But that's something that you're searching for, right? You would love to be getting DJ Reader back right now from the PUP list. You're not. And the guy that you drafted to help fill that nose tackle role is still in a brace and limping around. So defensive tackle, I think, would be a major one, probably at the top of the list. And then offensive tackle, depending on Amarius Mims, depending on how confident they are in Jackson Kirkland and confident they are in Cody Ford. I think that's probably the least likely because it's just hard to find that guy, but wouldn't rule it out. So those are the spots. And then, of course, punter would be the other one that I think they'll be on the lookout for.
It wasn't too long ago that the Bengals claimed Max Sharping, and then he was with the team for 2 years. So an offensive lineman, I don't know if I'm necessarily hyper focused on offensive tackle, although if they have concerns about the health of their 2 top tackles that are not Orlando Brown, then I could certainly see the focus being on tackle. Anywhere along the offensive line wouldn't shock me at this point. But I agree with you that the top of the priority list is probably the defensive interior, followed by an edge player. And the thought that Joe Goodberry actually did a video with some of his thoughts on the 53-man roster and put this idea into my head that has scared me since I heard it, which is we talked last year about how when the Bengals went to their second string on the defensive line, they rotated an entire unit in, say, for the second or third drive of the game on defense. And you looked up and you're like, man, why is the defense suddenly getting chunked? It was because they went to that second string defensive line. And right now, not to take anything away from these players as individuals, but your second string defensive line is going to be Cedric Johnson, Chris Jenkins, Zach Carter, and Joseph Osai. If you just look at the next guys up, and there's no other real options on the roster right now. And I like some of those players. I like what Joseph Osai did this preseason. I liked the trajectory from Chris Jenkins throughout this preseason. I think he got better as time went on and got more comfortable in his role. But Cedric Johnson and Zach Carter are players that you should be looking to get better than if you can. for guys that are going to play significant rotational snaps for your team. And that is something that, as of today, they would be in line to do for the first few weeks of the season. And again, not to take anything away from those players. Cedric Johnson had an exciting preseason where he flashed some high-end ability, but I would be looking to get a little bit better than those players if you can. Now, is that easy to do around cutdowns, especially at the edge position where teams are pretty greedy and hoardy about the edge position? They like to keep those players. It can be tough. But there are certainly a few defensive linemen that I have on my radar that are potential cuts for other teams. And it's a market where they should be exploring trades as well, which is always harder to predict. You don't always know who's available for trades. It's not always obvious. But defensive line is definitely where I have my focus at the top of the list as well, James.
Yeah. And you should. I think that's probably most likely. Like if we looked at the FanDuel odds, I think just because there's so many guys that are going to get cut and there's so many options and the need is so dire, at least for us on paper, that if you can find a competent 24-year-old, 26-year-old, undrafted guy that you might not have been able to sign, but you liked him pre-draft, or a late round pick that just didn't make the team that they were drafted by. So many guys fit that mold. And the difference with defensive tackle is versus like running back. You have your guys at running back that you plan on playing. Obviously, depth is important, and having a fourth guy would be great. If someone that you feel confident in on the practice squad, or finding someone that can be an upgrade from Travion Williams, maybe even someone that can push for snaps as RB3 or whatever, it would be great. I think that that's slightly more challenging because they already have guys that they feel confident in. You mentioned it. You're not feeling bullish on Zach Carter. I don't think anyone is at this point. I'm sure he knows that. It's a real important season for him from an NFL standpoint, but he's got to play better. And we haven't seen it, so you can't bank on that. McKinley Jackson, injured. And even if he comes back soon, unproven and a rookie, without the snaps that you wanted him to get throughout camp and preseason and joint practices. And so it's going to be tough to bank on him too. So yeah, I think it's pretty clear where they should focus for sure.
A few names that I'll throw out there. I've got a few names. Defensive line, we'll start there. Tommy Togiai looks like he's not going to make the team in Atlanta. He was a draft crush of mine back in the day when he was a third round pick, I think, for the Cleveland Browns. And I don't think that I saw a roster projection for the Atlanta Falcons where he was making the team. He's had a solid preseason. He's been a solid player. I'm not saying he's a world beater or anything, but he's a guy that I would like as a fifth defensive tackle. Dean Lowry, don't know if he's going to make the team in Pittsburgh. There could be a number of Pittsburgh interior defensive linemen and Cleveland defensive linemen in the division that could be interesting, including Jawan Briggs, UC Bearcat, who could not make the team up in Cleveland. Kyle Pecco might not make the team, although I think he is more likely to make, I think, the Lions. But there's a chance that he doesn't make it up there. The Chargers seem to have extra defensive linemen kicking around right now. Some of these guys might not make the team, like Mike Hinton. You want a Mike Hinton and a Mike Hilton on the same team. Chris Rumpf and Scott Matlock. Sorry, it's Chris Hinton. Dang. I knew I'd get that confused. Names. But those are some defensive linemen that I think could be interesting, that stand out. And some other people have suggested some other players. Raymond Johnson III, a familiar face if he doesn't make his team. Jared Clark, PJ Mustipher. A number of names there on the defensive line. And there's also some running backs that one of which I think the Bengals will be interested in and will kick the tires
real quick
on.
Before you do that. You just named like 50,000 guys, like 50,000.
Yeah.
That shows the need
50,
at defensive line. Jake was looking up. You looked up. You did go on LinkedIn Jobs and you typed in defensive tackle. You had to. There's no way. Some of those names are fake.
I looked at a few potential cut down to 53 projections for a number of teams, and I think it was like CBS Sports had an article on popular waiver claim targets.
Yeah, sure.
So
it's just it
that
was just
helps
a
to
lot.
guide the thing. It's a lot of guys.
There aren't nearly as many at running back, and
No.
and that's That's it. I mean, if you're watching on YouTube, the thumbnail's got Israel Abanikanda on it. And that's someone, if you're an everydayer, we talked about before that 2023 draft as someone the Bengals could be interested in. He falls to round 5. And now he's kind of buried on the Jets depth chart. So Izzy, come to Cincinnati and break off some big runs. He would be fun. And he's not just I'm not sure he would even be active early, but he would certainly give the Bengals ceiling in that running back room a big lift.
Popped off a 46-yard, I believe, touchdown run in his final preseason game for the Jets as well. Would be very fun. We'll wrap up with a couple other running back names really quick. We got to talk about Samaje Perine. And then Mike Sando dropped his QB tiers, and Joe Burrow's placement a little controversial for some readers. We will discuss what the NFL thought of Joe Burrow in that tier list coming up next.
Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is where you need to go right now. Not only are they America's #1 sports book, but if you're listening to this podcast, if you're watching this podcast, you are a football fan. You're an NFL fan, which is why you have to take advantage of FanDuel's latest offer, because now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. 3 weeks of Sunday Ticket for free. And all you have to do is make a $5 bet. Yeah, that's right. With FanDuel at FanDuel.com/locked-on. And once that trial starts, then you can use a YouTube TV base plan. You'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game, every single one. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. All you have to do is get started today by going to FanDuel.com/locked-on. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on to download America's #1 sportsbook.
James, before we talk about the QB tiers from Mike Sando over at The Athletic, which is always fun to peruse, get a feel for where the NFL is on different quarterbacks around the league. Samaje Perine, a name at running back we did not discuss in the waiver wire wish list. And maybe it's because he's not on your wish list. Poor Samaje Perine, former Bengal, doing all that dirty work in pass pro, not making James's wish list. But I think this is a player that, regardless of your thoughts on Samaje Perine, they did not want to see him leave to Denver when he left to Denver. And he now has a very good shot of not making that team. It would be very obvious for them to go kick those tires if he were to become available.
Sure, it's the most likely outcome. If Samaje Perine is available, I think the Bengals will be interested. Heck, they may give up a 7th rounder just to get him here. Like, that would not floor me.
I don't think they would want to take that salary on because his contract is a little bigger than you would like it to be, but wouldn't be the biggest shock ever.
It's 1 year, plenty of cap space. So I'm just saying it wouldn't shock me because Samaje chose to go to Denver. That would be the thing. Like, if you really want him, and maybe he has no choice and would want to come back to Cincinnati, but you just don't know for sure. So I throw that out there. And I wouldn't say I don't want him. He's just not moving your running back room forward. Now, if you're saying your running back room on game day is Perine, Moss, and Chase Brown, sure. But you're really just replacing Travion Williams with a guy who's had more snaps on offense, which I get and I understand it. But that's not like a long-term solution. Does it make them a little better? It would. And it would make them deeper. And I think that would be where I'd be excited about it, is if Travion is your 4th and Perine is your 3rd, you feel much better, I think, about the floor of that room than you would with Travion as your 3rd. And I'm not even sure the 4th running back or the practice squad running back is on the roster right now.
Yeah, I don't know that they're practice squad players for a couple of positions that are currently on the team, but maybe they surprise us and they like some guys more than we thought they would like them based on the preseason. But you're right. It raises the floor of the running back room. Samaje Perine is better than Travion Williams. I think it's more than just more experienced. I think he is a little bit of a better player. Is it significant? Does he raise a ceiling? I don't think so, but he does raise the floor of the running back room unless he's really fallen off. And that's the thing that I don't really know about. I did not watch his preseason snaps in Denver closely, where he lost out on a running back battle by all appearances. He's a little bit older than the other options there. But Ben Albright throughout this preseason has targeted or had a circle around Samaje Perine's name on that Denver depth chart as a guy that could get cut. And it looks like that's the way things are going to go there. And obviously, some of these guys we're talking about as waiver wire wish list targets won't get cut. And none of these, some of these won't ever be options in the first place. But that's one that I think obviously bears watching.
If you want to really revamp the room and make it feel like it's good for week one and deep and yet has some upside, how about you just get both guys?
Yeah.
Abanaconda and Perine, because the two guys, they're going to complement each other. They're not going to get in each other's way. Perine becomes your third running back and active on game days and can help on special teams and do whatever else you ask him to do. And Abanaconda can learn, and who knows, maybe raise the ceiling of that running back room. Like that's what I would do. And this gripe, and we've talked about it 1,000 times off air, goes back to the draft where you have 10 picks. I get it's not a great running back draft. There were running backs in that draft that could have helped this Bengals running back room and could have helped running backs coach Justin Hill. And heck, some undrafted guys over the past couple of years that signed elsewhere. It's like, man, it would be nice to have that guy in the building. And so that's why if you could give me Abanaconda and Perine, I would do a little dance at the beginning of every episode, Jake, but it might be a little more exciting than the usual dance.
Yeah, it goes back to a criticism we've had of their approach to undrafted free agents for a while. They don't typically spend a lot of money there. It makes it hard for them to compete for some of the more sought after undrafted free agents. And they just haven't had a terribly high hit rate there. Not that anyone does. That's a really hard place to hit. But when you talk about running backs, that is not an area where they have had a great deal of success in signing undrafted college free agents. Let's move on and talk a little bit about these QB tiers. Joe Burrow, who previously was discussing on various podcasts or one specific podcast about how, maybe people forgot about him a little bit, but you couldn't really blame them because he was hurt. And at some point we said, well, the NFL hasn't really forgotten about Joe Burrow. And that appears to remain true. The QB tiers that Mike Sando does are commentary from coaches, coordinators, executives, assistant coaches, and a few analytics staffers across the league. And Joe Burrow this year received 43 tier 1 votes and 7 tier 2 votes, which is down a little bit from last year. Going into last year, he had 49 tier 1 votes and 1 tier 2 vote. The injury brings him down just a hair, but based on the votes, the NFL, all these voters, coaches, executives, etc., still see Joe Burrow as the second best quarterback in the NFL, ahead of Josh Allen, behind Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly where he should be. And it's unique, Jake, because these tiers are way different than the player rankings. Like Joe Burrow's 36th or 39th or whatever it was in those player rankings.
I don't even know. Couldn't even tell you.
It was insane. He was in the 30s. And that's ridiculous. That's laughable. This makes sense. And it makes sense because it has, and I don't necessarily agree with all the comments, but clearly they're all leery of the injury stuff. Mm-hmm. And they should be. We all are. That's why the glove thing last week is being discussed. That's why all offseason, it's like, oh, well, when is Joe starting to throw? Oh my God, look, Joe, there's grainy video of Joe Burrow working out at Black Sheep. Okay, it might not be grainy, but you get the point. Like everyone wanted to see any little update because we know how important he is. He's the franchise. And I'm a little surprised. I thought if I would have guessed, I would have had the NFL personnel having Joe third and Allen second because of the injury. I thought they would react a little bit, but clearly they didn't overreact. And that's good. Because I think that shows NFL teams and NFL personnel aren't overreacting to an injury that looked really, really serious and was really, really serious. But let's see Joe get out there. And obviously when he is out there and he is healthy, he's been the second best quarterback in football really since 2021. I'm not really sure how you could debate that, but maybe some will. That to me is pretty clear.
There's a big gap between what the NFL sees when they look at Joe Burrow versus what some analytics folks see when they look at Joe Burrow, and some of the quote unquote quarterback experts see when they look at Joe Burrow.
Experts.
And there are several reasons for that, but Mike Sando points out that Joe Burrow drew the greatest amount of dissent from various Twitter commenters, including ESPN's analytics guy, whose name I'm now forgetting. And I'm sorry that I'm forgetting the name, but I think that Sando points out rightly that it is a big year for Burrow. He needs to show that he can still do the things that he could do before. And some of the quotes that you see from some of the voters in Sando's piece, at some point physically his body is going to fail, said a defensive coach who has faced Burrow multiple times. The head coach said he's definitely a tier 1, but they got to be careful. He's getting hurt on his throwing arm. He has injuries to his legs. That will affect your arm. I'm curious to see how the ball comes off his hand this year. And I think that last sentence, I'm curious to see how the ball comes off his hand this year, is a common sentiment. I think a lot of people are curious to see what Joe Burrow looks like coming off this injury, which is fairly unprecedented, as we've discussed many times.
Yeah, no doubt. I want to react to those comments real quick since you mentioned them. We'll do that coming up next. I totally get the ball coming off of his hand. I think we're all going to pay attention to that, and especially after he's hit 12 times in 2 weeks, let's just say. Hopefully it's not that many, but it can be that many. Right after he's hit a couple of times in the first quarter, is it still everything normal in the third quarter, in the fourth quarter, late in the game? And that's something we all have to see, and I think Joe, as much as anyone, wants to see that. But to me, and I look at these tiers, like Aaron Rodgers is still 7th overall. Aaron Rodgers. Like, it wasn't just last year. Like, people were questioning him a couple of years ago. And so I do think that it just shows that they don't overreact too far. But I do agree it's a crucial year, because we could look up, like, if, let's say he's just okay this year and the Bengals are just okay, and Stroud takes a step forward. Lamar is what Lamar was last year. Matthew Stafford plays really, really well, who's tied for 5th. Josh Allen obviously could surpass him. Like, you could see him drop quickly, or maybe he tries to go the other way. And I know that's his goal. That's his mindset. He didn't say it this offseason. Of course, he's going after Mahomes and wants to not only beat the Chiefs, but show that he's the best quarterback on the planet. So that's why you get bigger, stronger, faster. We'll see if it translates.
Yeah. Big year for Burrow. Not breaking news there.
Because it could go either way, right? Like it,
yeah.
Or he could just stay 2. But I could see him winning the MVP. I could see a lot of different things. So hopefully it is that one.
Yeah. Going to be very interesting to see in a few weeks how that hand and the ball coming off his hand looks for the course of an entire NFL game. We've seen him throughout practices, obviously. We've seen him get through all of training camp and all these things. But I wonder if he's done any, and this is just an idle speculative kind of question. I wonder if he's done any like fall training, not to hearken too much back to Tua Tagovailoa and him trying to not hit his head on the ground so much when he took hits, but, you know, just various things to test out the wrist in terms of breaking falls, or if he just didn't get to that point, you know, because you wouldn't do that early in rehab, obviously, when there's like a significant risk of re-injury.
I don't know when you could do that.
Exactly.
You know? Yeah, I don't think so. To your point, I don't think so.
Seems like it would be helpful, maybe. I don't know. From like a mental
you know what's going to be
standpoint?
helpful?
Go ahead.
Jamar Chase.
Oh, yeah.
Having Jamar Chase back on the field. And
yeah, so go ahead. We talked about this yesterday, and we got a little bit more information about Jamar Chase's return to practice.
Ari Myroff of the 33rd team now, he said that negotiations between the Bengals and Chase continuing, that Chase did participate in more of practice, a lot of individual work, which is expected. Even if he signed a deal, I don't think he would have jumped into team 11 on 11. So pretty normal for that to be the case. I bet his first team session could be this week a little bit, because you have the ramp up. Certainly he will be in team next week, but I wouldn't be shocked if it's Wednesday. You have a couple late days off Tuesday, and then Wednesday you get after it. But there's that. And then I think Paul Dehner Jr. was the first to report that Jamar expected to practice all week long. So it's a decent chance we hear from Jamar this week. Even if a deal doesn't get done, we'll certainly see him at some point on the practice field. And the other thing that Myroff mentioned is Jamar's camp is kind of like, all right, well, we want to get a deal done now, but they want it to be market value, which I get. And they're kind of waiting on CeeDee Lamb as well, potentially, because then it could hammer home that Justin Jefferson deal isn't the outlier, which I don't think it is. I think CeeDee's going to get right there where Justin is, or maybe more than Justin.
That's the kind of year CeeDee Lamb had last year. And that was Maro's point, was that if these other receivers, Lamb, and he also mentioned Brandon Ayuk, if those guys get the kind of contracts they're looking for that are pushing or above Justin Jefferson's deal, well, then the Bengals will have no choice but to realize this is what the market is now. Justin Jefferson is not an outlier, and they're holding on to some sort of probably false hope that it wasn't an outlier. I think that I agree with you. It probably is the direction the market is going, and they will have to pay Jamar Chase that kind of money. And the other side of this is it's very interesting to see him hold out of all of camp and then return now, even though I don't think it's necessarily an indicator that a deal is about to get done.
No.
And that could be the way some people saw it. Maybe that's what it means. Maybe they're very confident something gets done before week 1 at this point. But I don't think that there's any reading between the lines we can really do here outside of Myra reporting that they are continuing to have negotiations. And this is something that they're still working on. After Mike Brown, the last time we heard about this directly from the team, said he didn't think it was going to happen before the season, or certainly in the season, because the Bengals, as many teams, don't like to negotiate during the season.
Yeah, I don't think it'll happen in season. And so less than 2 weeks, 13 days. Hopefully it's not the morning of week 1. But heck, Joe got done, signed it, and got on a flight and then went and played Cleveland. So hopefully it's much sooner than that. Hopefully they can get it done. Obviously, we are on Jamar watch if anything does get done. I don't know. I don't feel great about it. I think it might get pushed now that he's back on the field.
I wonder if that has an impact or not. It's very hard to say. We haven't heard from the player. We're not going to hear from Duke Tobin or Mike Brown about this until next summer. So there won't be direct updates, certainly, from anyone. And we'll see if and what Jamar Chase has to say about it if he talks to any of the media down after practice. It would be Tuesday would be the first opportunity.
Wednesday.
What day is it? It's Monday.
Okay. Cut down day Tuesday.
That's right.
I mean, if Jamar makes the team. Just kidding.
Yeah. Then we're back to somewhat of a regular season practice schedule, James. Is that going to be a thing coming up here soon too?
Yeah. The people don't know what that is, but you'll have us daily regardless.
Yeah. Just means they're off on Tuesdays. That's all that really means. The players are off on Tuesdays. We will be back after the Bengals have trimmed their roster to 53 players. We will analyze the surprises. I'm sure they will catch us off guard with 1 or 2 moves because there's information that we are not privy to that the team knows about. We'll see what happens with some of those IR moves. We'll have you covered with analysis of that initial 53 and what the next moves might be, because the initial 53 is unlikely to be the 53 when the Bengals take the field for week 1. Until next time, that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.